Any more announcements?
We're continuing on with our renovations. We're getting there slowly but surely upstairs, which is great.
Yes.
We had glass doors put in this week. If you want to have a check them out before you leave, feel free. Brent's working hard on the electrical side of things. As you may have noticed as you walked down, there was some stuff there that's going to be completed very soon. So, and upstairs, so just plotting on that. There's no working bee this Tuesday.
That's right.
For anybody who was planning to come this Tuesday, we've cancelled it for this Tuesday. Thank you.
Okay, that's good, and great to see the playground taking shape down there, and little folks are taking advantage of that. And that's a new aircon up there, Brent.
Yes, it's actually donated by Shoreway Church in Melton. Very generous of them. That's one I put in for them several years ago, and they've shifted their church, and they were quite happy for us to have it.
It looks to be a pretty modern unit.
Yeah, it's pretty up to date, and that is powerful too.
Good. Good. Thanks for that.
No more freezing.
All right. Hopefully this mic works. Good morning, church. I hope we're all doing well. We've had some crazy weather, but also some good weather, and so that's good. And one of the things, we're continuing our series on faith, and just because God felt like having an extra faith test, I had my little flat screen sort of notebook I was going to read off, and it didn't have the right version on there, and I was like, oh no. So just then I had to rush home. I grabbed my laptop and I ran back. So that was a real test on faith already before we've even started. So that's exciting. But for those who haven't been here before, we're continuing our series on faith. Now I believe this is part 9. So we've been doing this all year, and we've covered lots of different aspects of faith. But today I really wanted to probably go back to some more of the beginning components of faith, the sort of fundamentals of faith, what faith really looks like in a really practical sense. So there are two verses that I want to read to you before we begin. The first is when Jesus curses a fig tree in verses 18 to 21. It says, early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, may you never bear fruit again. And immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. How did the fig tree wither so quickly? Jesus replied, truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what I have done to this fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. And our second verse is in Hebrews 1:11. Now the faith in confidence is what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. As I was working on this message last night, I was listening to a bunch of different songs, as I do. And one of these songs, they're not necessarily all Christian songs. One of these songs is Crazy by Niles Barkley. It's like 2010 era for those that know it. And there's this line in the song, and it says, my heroes have the heart to live their lives out on the limb. My heroes have the heart to live their lives out on the limb. And I was thinking, as I was reading that, I was thinking, I want to be like them. You know, and I started thinking about the heroes that we talk about in Sunday during church. And the reason we talk about them is somewhere along their journey, they had the faith to live their lives out on the limb, to do something that didn't seem like it was going to happen, to go beyond doing something that we would call crazy. And I sort of began to examine my own life as a believer and a Christian. And would I be remembered for being someone who claimed to know God, but, would I be forgotten? Or am I one of those people who's crazy enough to live their life of faith out on the limb? And it's amazing, we think about all the stories in the Bible, and we think of people, we talk about Abram, and we talk about people like David, and they are incredible people. We say they're people of great faith. And then I sort of think, well, what would people say of me or of us? right? And I'm not talking about everyone, just the people that you know, the immediate people, like your kids or your immediate friends. Would they say that that my father or my mother was a person of great faith? Will co-workers be able to say my friend was a person of faith? And sometimes the sad truth is that we don't always live our lives out on the limb. We live safe lives, and we never get to see all of God's promise. And when I think of the word crazy, I think of people like Noah, whom God told and instructed him each day to build an ark in a desert where he hadn't seen any rain. Like, think about this right now. Noah, he hadn't been trained to be a boat builder. He hadn't gone to school for this. He literally had an instruction from God. And by instruction from God, he quit his work, enlisted his children. He lives in child labour. But he began to build this boat. And there wasn't a drop of rain that had fallen. And we would call that crazy. And I want you to understand, because we often become so familiar with the stories in the Bible. And we go, yeah, Noah was a great man of faith. And he was. But to think about how crazy that would be in sort of a current context would be the equivalent of me saying, church, you've trusted me in the past, but God's told me we're going to visit another planet. Right? And rather than our ties doing our normal things, we're going to build a spaceship, right? And we're going to bring it every day, bring the kids, they're going to work as well. We're going to build this spaceship, right? And we're going to go to Mars 3. We haven't found it yet. Mars 3, God's told me we're going to go to Mars 3, right? Now, if you were taking me seriously, you would say, you think I was crazy. And that was what it was like for Noah, right? He went to build something that he had never seen before, and no one believed him until it started to rain. It was crazy when he started doing it, but it was faith when it started raining. Right? What's crazy, and that's my first point, is what was crazy in one season will be counted as faith in another season. Because when everything seems crazy, but God has ordered it to happen, not everyone will agree, not everyone will be able to co-sign on it, not everyone will be able to applaud it, but I really believe that when you have a vision from God, when you hear the voice of God, when you live your life on the edge and take the plunge and say, God, this doesn't make sense. But if you're saying it, if you're telling me to move here, or if you're telling me to quit this job and start another, sometimes it's telling you to stay in a job. We often think about, that faith takes to change. Sometimes it takes faith to stay as well. But whatever it is, it takes faith. If whatever you're saying, God, this faith is the thoughts and actions that lack reason, but trusting fully in what you cannot explicitly prove. Faith is thoughts and actions that lack reason, but trusting fully in what you cannot explicitly prove.
Good, James.
And I'm looking, this idea of crazy faith is that it doesn't make full sense when I'm looking at it in a natural world sense. Like when I'm looking at the facts, they don't make sense. But for some reason, I believe that this can happen. And what I'm telling you is there's a level where you can live in God, and at that level, it doesn't make complete sense, but you fully believe what you cannot prove. And it's the same faith, it's that crazy faith of Noah building an ark. It's in Abraham believing that his wife can have a baby at 75. And it's hoping that it would come to pass. It's David thinking he could defeat Goliath. All these things at some time seemed completely crazy, but it was only crazy what was crazy in one season was faith in another. And the first part of faith is really hope. And that's where Hebrews 11 comes in. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. I'm here to tell you, faith is a certainty in what is hoped for and the conviction of what is not seen. It's not faith if you can see it. It's not faith if it was never a hope. Right? And I think this is often the thing that we come into, and not in a general sense of hopelessness or depression, and those are really big issues and not something I want to dive into right now. But it's often a case as believers that we have hope in one area, but there's another area that we don't have hope in. We don't believe it's going to happen in this other area of our life. And it's when we get into that situation where you may have had hope at one stage, but opportunities haven't worked out the way you've wanted, or things have missed or passed where you wanted them to be. And at that point, you feel that you lose some of that hope. And hope's free. You can always hope, but you often think, I believe it for someone else, but I don't believe it for me. I really like maths. It's one of the things I really enjoyed at school. And so what I want to give you today is a simple formula for faith, right? And it's not complex maths, don't worry about that, although I'd love to do that one day. But today I want to give you a formula for faith, and it's this. It is intellectual agreement plus trust equals faith. Intellectual agreement plus trust equals faith, right? So an intellectual agreement is to believe that something is true, right? I believe it to be true within me, in my mind. I believe that that is true. But trust is really being confident in the fact that something is true, right? And I'm going to do this with a demonstration. So I'm going out on a limb. We're living life on a limb today, so we're going to do a demonstration. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Gary to come up. This is something I've already asked him about, so he knows it's coming. All right, so what we're going to do here, all right, you can just stand there, Gary, that's good. All right. Okay, so some of you might not be able to see all of this, but we've got 2 chairs here, right? All right, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions, Gary. These are not trick questions, right? I'm not trying to trick you into something. So this is not a joke, okay. But would you agree these are both chairs?
Yes.
They are chairs. Good. We both agree on that as well, which is even better. All right. So we can agree that these are chairs, right? If you were going to sit on a chair, which chair would you sit on? You sit on this one, right? And why would you sit on that one?
It's stronger.
It's stronger, right? It's the safe bet. It's the seat that you would want to sit on, right? Like this seat, we're not sure. It's not as big. It's not as strong or as comfortable. I can see some people can't see it because it's so little. But it's the best bet, right? You know, what if I told you that both chairs can hold you, right? That intellectually both were built and designed to hold more weight than you're carrying. That could be trust weight, it can be intellectual weight. Which chair would you choose? Yeah, right? He still chooses the larger chair. You know, we intellectually agree that they're both chairs, but there's a trust in one of them. He trusts this chair. This other chair, he doesn't trust as much, right? And the problem is that you can agree intellectually that they are both chairs, but if you don't put your weight in it, you're not really trusting it. And many people say, you know, God can do miracles, you know, but you haven't received the miracle because you haven't put your weight, you haven't put your trust in it. God can bless someone. People believe it. God can bless someone, but He's not going to bless you because you don't put your weight, you don't put your trust in that other chair. I don't know. This chair looks safe, right? It looks stronger. But what if the small chair is what God had put as part of a purpose or a will in your life, right? Which chair do you trust the most?
Even though I believe in God, in my eyes, that's the better chair.
Yeah, right. It looks like the better chair, right? It's true. Most of us, when God shows us a will for our life, or a piece of it, or a part of the purpose in that, and it doesn't look like what we think can hold us up, it doesn't look like it's going to happen on our timetable, we still choose the thing that we want instead of what God has purposed in our lives. Right? Alright. So, what about, Gary, what about if I sat in this chair like this? What if you had seen someone else sit in that chair? Would you want to sit in it then?
I'd have confidence in sitting in it, yes.
You'd have confidence in sitting in it. Well, that's great. And that is exactly how faith works, right? If the world could ever see a church who really put all their full weight in the promises of God, right? In what God said would be an abundant life. Maybe someone who had never believed would have the faith to sit down. All right, Gary, take a seat on this seat.
All right, 'cause you're in charge.
I have faith. Right? Now, how much time and energy did Gary spend standing when he could have been sitting in something that was designed to hold him up? Right? He believed it in theory, he knew it was a chair, but he didn't want to put his weight on it. You know, and a lot of people don't want to put their weight on something because they don't want to embarrass God. God never needs your protection. God never needs you to protect his reputation. You lose nothing when you totally believe and putting your weight and your faith in him. Right? And, you know, sometimes I can pray for something and it doesn't come to pass, right? And, you know, that doesn't mean, just because it didn't happen didn't mean that I shouldn't have put all of my weight, all of my trust in him. And the problem is, even if Gary, you know, had failed in that prayer or in that request or whatever, and he's still sitting closer to the place he should have been. And the problem is that often in these types of scenarios, we look at this chair and it's our own designs and it's our own plans and it feels higher and we feel like we can stand on our own promises and our own abundance. And it feels like we're getting to the right place, but we're not sitting in the place that God had wanted us to be in. And when we don't sit in that place, we miss out on the promises that God had really instilled and purposed for our lives. All right, Gary, you can take a seat. Yeah, exactly. But still, you know, we trust when it comes to it. These chairs, when we sit on these chairs, we trust the manufacturer, right? It doesn't matter how it looks. It's about who created it. And when God is the creator, we can always put our faith and our trust in him. And this is the thing, when we sit on that seat that God has designed for us, when we sit in that place, then it gives us our opportunity to live in his glory. So I want to encourage somebody that faith is not simply believing that God can do something, it's believing that he will do it in your life. And that brings me to my second point about foundational faith, right? Which is, faith is not a foundation, faith is the foundation. You know, many people can study faith and ask God and not really understand exactly where this comes from. And we saw that in Matthew 21:22. Jesus curses the fig tree, right? It says, "How did this fig tree wither so quickly?" And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to this fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." And when the Bible says, pray without ceasing, when you ask, it's knowing that God hears your faith. And most of the time when we pray, there's often this thing, and it's something that really is a big part, it sort of impacts me in a big way, which is this idea that I can pray for something, and I might pray once for it, but if it doesn't come to pass, I sort of go, well, it just wasn't God's will in my life. And that's not what we're doing. What you're doing, God's saying, no. You have to understand the authority that you have. But you can't pray without faith. You cannot live an abundant Christian life that is promised to us without faith. And as I've always said, it's never a case of when you pray and you believe in something, it's not about believing in your own skills, it's believing in who He is. It's always His authority that gives us that understanding. And remember this, that faith begins where understanding ends. When you don't know, that's where faith starts, right? When God called you and said, you're supposed to, go to college and you're not sure how to pay for it, or you're going to do this new career adventure and you're not sure how to get there. When you don't know how to get there, that's where faith begins. And I've seen that a lot of times in our church, where there's something, we believe for something that is going to change and happen in our church, or build something new, or renovate this basement area, and we don't know how to get there. We don't feel like we have enough funds. We don't feel like we have enough resources or manpower. When faith begins where understanding ends. And a lot of the times, what happens when we get caught up in faith is we want to know every step of the way to get there. And the problem is, you're paralyzed because you don't know all the steps. You had faith enough for salvation, but not enough faith to move from beyond where you're at. And so you live in this, you live in this area where instead of living in the fullness and abundance and in the promises of God, you're living less than what God called you for, and less than what that provision is there. And so there will always be a gap. There will always be a gap between your abilities and the promises of God. There will always be a gap between what you can network your way and the thing that God has called you to be. Because this whole Christian life is being dependent on God. It's to trust the less stable thing, the less shaky thing, or the more shaky thing, and living life on the limb where we have to trust God a little more and have to lean into Him a little further, because it's only in those places that God is taking us into the spaces that He wanted us and purposed into our life. I think there's a big connection between trust and fear. It was something I wanted to share on, and maybe I'll do that next time. But it's this idea that what you worship will be proven by what you trust. And what you worship will be proven by what you trust. And you can have, as we saw before, you can have absolute trust in God, but when you get to those points where that trust is tested and you look to something other than God, that's where it's like looking on the big chair. It's going, I trust in this because I know what this is. It was a point that was always, with the Israelites, it was always a point of downfall. Whenever the Israelites, for those who remember, the god of Baal is often mentioned a lot, and the god of Baal is the god of abundance for the pagans at the time. And whenever the Israelites were concerned about their hunger and the things that could meet their needs, they'd often pray to these other gods and go, well, they're a god of abundance, that can provide my need. It was leaning on their own thoughts and purposes as to how they could get there. And every time they did, it was always a point of downfall for Israel. What you worship demonstrates what you trust. And God it's this funny thing where God isn't looking specifically for worship, He's looking for worshippers. Because in that worship action, it demonstrates what you trust. And so when you go to those spaces and places where you feel that you are unsure, lean into God. Lean into His purposes and His promises. It may not look like the way you want it to look. It may not be the shape that you expected it to take. But if you hear God's voice and trust in His purposes and will, then I promise you, He will get you there. Let me close with a prayer. Father, thank you for this time this morning. Father, those stories of this idea of a crazy faith, of living life out on the limb, Father, where we don't know where we're going. People like Abraham, who had the child at 75, or people like Noah, who built an ark. It seemed crazy in the time, but when the promise was fulfilled, when the rain started falling, it was faith that had got them to that space, Father. Lord, help us have open hearts and open minds to receive your word and your heart and your vision and your peace, Father, that when you push in us in different ways, that we are open to receiving that word, to building that faith, to relying on the path that says, Father, I will lean into you, even though it doesn't look right, even though I don't have an understanding as to how to get there, Father, that we will lean into you and that your promises are always and forever. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.